Chapter 3. By the time Frankie got back on island, the street lamps were coming on. Downtown Coronado was dressed for the holidays with streamers and lights. White-bearded, red-coated Santas stood in front of several shops, ringing bells. Illuminated snowflakes hung from lines strung above the street. At home, Frankie found her parents in the living room, dressed for dinner. Dad stood at the bar, flipping through the newspaper, while Mum sat in her favorite chair by the fire, smoking a cigarette and reading a Graham Greene novel. The house was decked out for the holidays, with an extravagance of lights and a 10-foot tree. At Frankie's entrance, Dad closed the newspaper and smiled at her. "Hey, ya peanut, I have news," Frankie said, practically bursting with excitement. "You've met a boy you like," Mom said, putting down her novel. "Finally!" Frankie came to a stop. "A boy? No." Mom frowned. "Francis, most of the girls your age." "Mom," Frankie said impatiently, "I'm trying to tell you something important." She took a deep breath and said, "I joined the Army Nurse Corps, the ANC. I'm now Second Lieutenant McGrath. I'm going to Vietnam. I'll get to be with Finley for part of his tour." "That's hardly funny, Francis," Mom said. Dad stared at Frankie, unsmiling. I don't think she's joking, Bet. You joined the army," Mom said, slowly, as if the words were a foreign language that she was trying to sound out. "I'd salute, but I don't know how. Basic training starts in 3 weeks. Fort Sam Houston." Frankie frowned. Why weren't they congratulating her? "McGraths and Alexanders always serve," she said. "You were thrilled when Finley volunteered." "The men serve," Dad said sharply. "The men." He paused. "Wait, did you say the Army? We're a Navy family. Always have been. Coronado is a Navy island." "I know, but the Navy wouldn't let me go to Vietnam until I'd served 2 years in a hospital stateside," she said. "Same with the Air Force. They said I didn't have enough experience. Only the Army would let me go right after basic training." "Sweet Jesus, Frankie," Dad said, running a hand through his hair. "There's a reason for rules like that. Take it back. Unvolunteer." Mom looked at Dad. She got to her feet slowly. "Good Lord, what will we tell people? What will you—" Frankie didn't understand. They were acting as if they were ashamed of her, but that made no sense. "How many times have you gathered us in your office to talk about this family's record of service, Dad? You told us how much you wanted to fight for your country. I thought, he's a man," Mom said. "And it was Hitler. And Europe, not some country no one can find on a map. It is not patriotic to do something stupid, Francis." Tears filled her eyes. She dashed them away impatiently. "Well, Connor, she's what you taught her to be. A believer. A patriot." At Mom's rebuke, Dad left the room, trailing smoke behind him. Frankie went to her mom, tried to hold her hand, but Mom stepped adroitly aside, not letting Frankie touch her. "Mom? I shouldn't have let your father fill your head with all that history. He made it sound so epic. Those family war stories. Although none of them were his, were they? He couldn't serve, so it became, oh, for God's sake, none of it matters now." She looked away. "I remember when my father came home from the war. Broken. Stitches holding him together. He had nightmares. I swear it's what killed him early." Her voice broke. "And you think you'll go over there and see your brother and have an adventure? How could you be so stupid? I'm a nurse, Mom, not a soldier. The recruiter said I'll be stationed at a big hospital, far from the front. He promised I would get to see Finley. And you believed him?" Mom took a long drag off of her cigarette. Frankie saw how her hand was shaking. "It's done. It's done. I report to basic training in January. And then I ship out for my tour in March. I'll be home for my birthday next week and for Christmas. I made sure. I know how much that matters to you." Mom bit her lip, nodding slowly. Frankie could see that her mother was trying to corral her emotions, trying to look calm. Suddenly, she reached out, pulled Frankie into her arms, hugged her so tightly she couldn't breathe. Frankie clung to her. buried her face in the teased, sprayed hair. "I love you, Mom," she said. Mom drew back, wiped her eyes, and looked hard at Frankie. "Don't you be a hero, Frances Grace. I don't care what you've been taught or what stories men like your father have told you. You keep your head down and stay back and stay safe. You hear me? I promise. I'll be fine." The doorbell rang. It was a distant sound, barely audible above the combination of their breathing and the unspoken words swirling in the silence between them. Mom glanced sideways toward the foyer. "Who on earth could that be?" "I'll go," Frankie said. She left her mother standing in the living room, alone. In the foyer, Frankie stepped around the gleaming rosewood table that held a large potted white orchid and opened the door. 2 naval officers in dress uniforms stood there at attention. Frankie had lived on Coronado Island all of her life, watched jets and helicopters roar overhead and sailors run in lines along the beach. At every party or gathering, someone told a World War II or Korea story. The town cemetery was full of men Coronado had lost in wars. She knew what officers at the front door meant. "Please," she whispered, wanting to back up and close the door. She heard footsteps behind her, heels on hardwood. "Frances," Mom said, coming up beside her. "What?" Mom saw the 2 officers and let out a quiet gasp. "Sorry, ma'am," one of the officers said, taking off his hat, tucking it under his arm. Frankie reached for her mother's hand, but Mom pulled away. "Come in," Mom said in a husky voice. "You'll want to speak to my husband. Sorry to inform you, ma'am, that Ensign Finley McGrath has been killed in action, shot down in a helicopter. No remains. All hands lost. No answers to their questions. Just a quietly spoken, 'It's war, sir,' as if that said it all. Answers are hard to come by." Frankie knew she would remember this evening in startling, scolding images. Dad, standing tall, his hands shaking, showing no emotion, until one of the officers called his son a hero, his voice quiet as he asked for details, as if they mattered. Where, when, how? Her mom, usually so elegant and cool, curling into herself on the chair, her carefully coiffed hair falling slowly apart, saying again and again, "How can it be? Connor, you said it was barely a war." Frankie didn't think either of her parents noticed. When she slipped out of the house and crossed Ocean Boulevard to sit in the cool sand, how had he been shot down? What was an officer's aide doing in a helicopter? And what did it mean that there were no remains? What were they supposed to bury? She felt tears well again and closed her eyes, recalled images of Finley on this beach, running into the surf, holding her hand, teaching her how to float on her back, how to swim, taking her to see Psycho when Mom had specifically forbidden it, sneaking her a bottle of beer on the 4th of July. She closed her eyes and let the memories flow. She remembered him and their life together, their fights and squabbles, going to Disneyland for the first time, riding their bikes in the summer, and racing to the tree on Christmas morning, him letting her win. Her big brother, gone. How often had she and Finn been out here at night together, running on the beach, riding their bikes home at night, guided by street lamps, laughing, poking each other, holding their arms outstretched, and thinking that riding a bicycle without holding on was taking a risk. How free they had felt, invincible. She felt a presence on the beach behind her, heard footfalls. Mom sat down in the sand beside her, half falling the last few inches. "They say we should bury another man's boots and helmet in my son's casket," she said at last. Her lower lip was bleeding a little, where she'd bitten it. She scratched at a red spot on her neck. "A funeral," Frankie said, thinking about it for the first time. Mourners in black, perched on pews, Father Michael droning on, telling funny stories about Finley, about his days as a rebellious altar boy, how he'd washed his toy soldiers in the baptismal font. How could any of them stand it? An empty coffin, no remains. Don't go, Mom said quietly. I'm right here, Mom. Mom turned. I mean, to Vietnam. Vietnam. A car crash of a word now. I have to, Frankie said. It was all she'd thought about since learning about her brother's death. How to get out of her commitment to the army. How to stay here with her parents and grieve and be safe. But it was too late for that. She'd signed on, made a promise. I don't have a choice, Mom. I can't undo it. She turned, said, Give me your blessing, please. I need you to say you're proud of me. For a split second, Frankie saw her mother's pain. It pulled the life from her cheeks and the color from her skin. She was pale, washed out. She stared at Frankie, her blue eyes dull, lifeless. Proud of you. You don't have to worry about me, Mom. I'll come home. I promise. Those were your brother's last words to me. Mom's voice broke. She paused for a second, looked like she was going to speak. Instead, she got slowly to her feet, turned away from Frankie, and walked back across the sand. I'm sorry, Frankie whispered, too softly for her mother to hear. But what did it matter? It was too late for words, too late to take any of it back. Chapter 3. End. Chapter 4. Frankie excelled in basic training, along with learning to march in formation, teamwork, and put on combat boots and a gas mask quickly. You never knew when you might be wakened at midnight for an emergency. You needed to move fast in a war zone. She'd learned how to apply a splint, debride a wound, carry a stretcher, and start an IV. She could roll bandages faster than any other recruit. By March, she was more than ready to put her new skills to the test. She had packed and checked her large Army-issued duffel bag, which she'd crammed full with her flak jacket, steel pot helmet, combat boots, GI kit, white nursing uniform, and field jacket. And now, at last, she was on her way. Hours after landing in Honolulu, she boarded a jet bound for Vietnam. The lone woman at the front of a line of 257 uniformed soldiers. Unlike the men, dressed in their comfortable olive drab fatigues, neatly bloused inside black boots, Frankie was required to travel in her class, A uniform, a green jacket, slim skirt, nylons, polished black pumps, and flat garrison hat, and beneath all of that, a regulation panty girdle to keep her nylon stockings up. It had been uncomfortable when she'd left Texas and boarded the plane bound for Vietnam. Now, 22 hours later, it was downright painful. It seemed ridiculous to her that in this day and age, she couldn't wear pantyhose. She tucked her new soft-sided overnight travel bag into the overhead bin and took a seat next to the window. As she sat down, a garter on her panty girdle snapped and popped her thigh like a rubber band. She struggled to get it fixed sitting down. Soldiers filed past her, laughing and talking, shoving each other. Many of them looked to be her age, or even younger. 18, 19 years old, most of them. A captain in stained, wrinkled fatigues paused at the end of her row. Mind if I join you, Lieutenant? Of course, Captain. He sat down in the aisle seat. Even in fatigues, she could see how thin he was. Heavy lines creased his cheeks. His clothes had the vague, unpleasant odor of mildew. Norm Bronson, he said with a tired smile. Frankie McGrath, nurse. Bless your heart, Frankie. We need nurses. The plane rolled forward, lifted off from the runway, and rose into the clouds. What's it like? She asked. Vietnam, I mean. Words won't help, ma'am. I could talk all day about what it's like, and you still won't be ready. But you'll learn fast. Just keep your head down. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Frankie had never seen anyone fall asleep so quickly. She reached into her black regulation handbag, pulled out her information packet, and reread it for the 1,000th time. Repetition and knowledge had always calmed her, and she was determined to be as exemplary a soldier as she'd been a student. It was the only way to prove to her parents that she'd been smart to enlist. Courageous even. Success mattered to them. She had memorized all of the military command and hospital locations, had underlined them in yellow on her map of Vietnam. She had also taken the behavioral guidelines to heart. Rules for personal conduct, for security on base, for what to wear and how to deal with firearms, for always taking pride in being a soldier. Everything made sense to her in the army. Rules existed for a reason, and you followed them to maintain order and help each other. The system was designed to force soldiers, men and women, into conformity, to build teams. It could save your life, apparently. Fitting in, being part of something larger, knowing your job, and doing it without question. She was comfortable with all of it. As she told her mother repeatedly, she was going off to war, but not really. Not like the men on this plane. She wouldn't be on the front lines, wouldn't get shot at. She was going to Vietnam to save men's lives, not to risk her own. Military nurses worked in big, bright buildings, like the huge 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon, which was protected by high fencing and was far from the fighting. Frankie leaned back and closed her eyes, letting the rumble of the engines lull and calm her. She heard the buzz of men talking, laughing, the snap hiss of colas being opened, the smell of sandwiches being handed out. She imagined Finley on the plane with her, holding her hand. For a split second, she forgot that he was gone, and she smiled. Coming to meet you, she thought, and then her smile faded. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought she heard Captain Bronson mumble quietly, "Sending goddamn babies." When Frankie woke, the airplane cabin was quiet, except for the hum of the jet engines. Most of the window shades were drawn. A few overhead lights cast a gloomy glow over the men packed into the jet. The loud razzing, the laughter, the horseplay that had marked most of this flight from Honolulu to Saigon was gone. The air seemed heavier, harder to draw into her lungs, harder to expel in an exhalation. The new recruits, recognizable by their still creased green fatigues, were restless, unsettled. Frankie saw the way they looked at each other, their smiles bright and brittle. The other soldiers, those weary-looking men in their worn fatigues, men like Captain Bronson, sat almost too still. Beside Frankie, the captain opened his eyes. It was the only change in him from sleeping to awake, just an opening of his eyes. Suddenly the plane lurched, or bucked, seemed to turn onto its side. Frankie smacked her head on the tray on the back of the seat in front of her as the plane nose-dived. The overhead bins opened. Dozens of bags fell out into the aisle, including Frankie's. Captain Bronson put his rough, gnarled hand on hers as she clutched the armrest. "It'll be okay, Lieutenant." The plane stalled, steadied, lurched upward into a steep climb. Frankie heard a pop, and something cracked beside her. "Is someone shooting at us?" Frankie said. "Oh my God." Captain Bronson chuckled. "Yeah, they love to do that. Don't worry. We'll just circle around for a while and try again. Here, shouldn't we go somewhere else to land?" "In this big bird." "No, it's Tan Sun Nut for us, ma'am. They'll be waiting on the FNGs we got on board." "FNGs? Fucking new guys." He smiled. "And one beautiful young nurse. Our boys will clear the airport in no time. Not to fret." The plane circled until Frankie's fingers ached from the pain of her grip on the armrests. Outside, she saw orange and red explosions and streaks of red across the dark sky. Finally, the plane evened out, and the pilot came on the loudspeaker to say, "Okay, sports fans, let's try this shit again. Buckle up," as if Frankie had ever unbuckled her seatbelt. The jet descended. Frankie's ears popped, and the next thing she knew, they were thumping onto the runway and powering down, rolling to a stop. "Senior officers and women disembark first," sounded over the loudspeaker. The officers waited for Frankie to exit first. She wished they hadn't. She didn't want to be first. Still, she grabbed her travel bag from the aisle and slung it, and her purse, over her left shoulder, leaving her right hand free to salute. When she exited the aircraft, heat enveloped her. And the smell. Good Lord, what was it? Jet fuel, smoke, fish. And honestly, there was a stench of something like excrement. A headache started to pulse behind her eyes. She made her way down the stairs, where a lone soldier stood in the darkness, backlit by ambient light from a distant building. She could barely make out his face. Off to the distant left, something exploded in orange flames. Lieutenant McGrath. She could only nod. Sweat crawled down her back. Were they bombing over there? The soldier said, "Follow me," and led her across the bumpy, pockmarked runway, past the terminal, and to a school bus that had been painted black, even the windows, which were covered in some kind of chicken wire mesh. "You're the only nurse arriving today. Take a seat and wait. Don't exit the bus, ma'am." The heat in the bus was sauna-like, and that smell, shit and fish, made her gag. She took a seat in the middle row of seats, by a black painted window. It felt like being entombed. Moments later, a black soldier in fatigues, carrying an M16, climbed into the driver's seat. The doors whooshed shut, and the headlights came on, carving a golden wedge out of the darkness ahead. "Not too close to the window, ma'am," he said, and hit the gas. "Grenades! Grenades!" Frankie inched sideways on the bench seat. In the fetid dark, she sat perfectly upright, was bounced up and down in her seat until she thought she might vomit. At last the bus slowed. In the headlights' glare, she saw a set of gates manned by American MPs. One of the guards spoke to the driver, then backed away. The gates opened and they drove through. Not much later, the bus stopped again. "Here you go, ma'am." Frankie was sweating so profusely she had to wipe her eyes. "Huh? You get out here, ma'am." "What?" "Oh." She realized suddenly that she hadn't gone to baggage claim, hadn't retrieved her duffel. "My bag." "It will be delivered, ma'am." Frankie gathered up her purse and travel bag and went to the door. A nurse stood in the mud, dressed in a white uniform, cap to shoes, waiting for her. How on earth could that uniform be kept clean? Behind her was the entrance to a huge hospital. "You need to exit the bus, ma'am," the driver said. "Oh, yes." Frankie stepped down into the thick mud and started to salute. The nurse grabbed her wrist, stopped the salute. "Not here. Charlie loves to kill officers." She pointed to a waiting jeep. "He'll take you to your temporary quarters. Report to admin for in-processing tomorrow at 0700. Frankie had too many questions to pick just one, and her throat hurt. Clutching her travel bag and purse, she walked over to the jeep and climbed up into the back seat. The driver hit the gas so hard, Frankie was thrown back in her seat. A jagged metal spring poked her in the butt. The nighttime traffic on base was stop and go. In snatches of light, she saw barbed wire and sandbags built up around wooden buildings, armed guards standing on towers, soldiers walking the streets in fatigues, holding guns. A large water tank truck pulled up next to them, rumbling, and rolled past. Horns honked constantly, and men shouted at one another. Another checkpoint. This one looked haphazardly thrown together with metal drums and coils of barbed wire and a tall chain link fence. The guard waved them through. Finally, they came to another fence, this one topped in coils of concertina wire. The jeep braked to a stop. The driver leaned over, shoved the door open. "Your stop, ma'am." Frankie frowned. It took time to maneuver out of the jeep in her tight skirt. "In that building, ma'am, second floor, 8A. Behind the tall ironwork fence, she saw what looked like an abandoned prison. Windows were boarded up with plywood, and big chunks of the walls were missing. Before Frankie could ask where to go, the jeep was backing up, honking at something and speeding away. Frankie went to the gate, which creaked loudly upon opening, and stepped into a weedy front yard, where scrawny children played with a half-deflated ball. An old Vietnamese woman squatted by the side of the fence, tending to something cooking over an open fire. Frankie followed a broken path to the front door and entered the building. Inside, a few gas lanterns flickered light against the walls. There was a woman in fatigues waiting for her in the shadowy entry. "Lieutenant McGrath, thank God." "Yes. I'll show you to your room. Follow me." The woman led the way past a hallway filled with cots, and up a set of sagging stairs to a second-floor room. Cubicle, really. A room barely big enough to hold the set of bunk beds in it, with a single dresser. Maybe the building had once been a convent or a school. "In processing tomorrow at 0700 hours. Report to admin." But the soldier walked away, shut the door behind her. Darkness. Frankie felt around for a light switch, found and flipped it. Nothing. She opened the door again, grateful for the bit of ambient light coming from gas lanterns in the hallway. She went in search of a bathroom, found one with a rust-stained sink and toilet. She turned on the faucet, got a weak flow of tepid water, and washed her face, then took a drink. A woman in an army green t-shirt and shorts walked in, saw Frankie, and frowned. "You'll be sorry about that, Lieutenant. Never drink the water." "Oh, I'm new. In country." "Yeah," the woman said, eyeing Frankie in her skirt uniform. "No shit." Frankie woke in the middle of the night with cramping in her stomach. She ran down the hall to the toilet and slammed the door shut behind her. She'd never had diarrhea like this in her life. It felt as if everything she'd eaten in the past month came rushing out of her, and when there was nothing left, the cramping went on. Dawn brought no relief from the pain. She checked the time, rolled into a bowl, and went back to sleep. At 0630 hours, she got up, stood on shaky legs, barely able to button her uniform. The panty girdle was torture. Outside, the weedy yard was full of skinny-armed Vietnamese children who eyed her silently. A laundry line held dozens of green fatigues. She pushed past the gate and walked through the huge, busy base, which was a haphazard collection of buildings and tents and shacks and roads, without a tree anywhere that she could see. They'd obviously created the place with bulldozers. There were petacycles with whole families on them, old cars pulled by water buffalo, and dozens of army vehicles vying to get somewhere fast. A jeep splashed past her, the driver honking at the children on the side of the road, at the water buffalo roaming alongside. No one looked twice at the woman in her Class A's, walking carefully, hoping not to vomit. It took Frankie nearly an hour to find the administration building, which was situated near Ward A of the sprawling Third Field Hospital, where nurses in starched white moved in groups, sometimes running, and announcements blared through black speakers. She knocked on the closed admin door, heard, "Come in," and did as she was told. Inside the office, she saluted to the thin female colonel seated at the desk in front of her. The woman looked up, lifted her chin in a sharp, bird-like motion that upset the perfect perch of her cat's eye glasses. The way she sighed at Frankie's entrance was hardly encouraging. "And you are?" "Second Lieutenant Francis McGrath, Colonel." The colonel rifled through the paperwork. "You're assigned to the 36th Evac Hospital. Follow me." She rose sharply and walked past Frankie to the door. Frankie struggled to keep up, hoping she wasn't going to have another bout of diarrhea. The colonel led the way through the throng of personnel toward a round white helipad with a red cross painted on it, where a helicopter waited. The colonel gave a thumbs up to the pilot, who immediately started the engine. The huge rotors rotated slowly, became a blur that blasted hot air at her. "I have questions, Colonel," Frankie stuttered. "Not for me, Lieutenant. Go. He doesn't have all day." The colonel forced Frankie to bend forward and pushed her toward the whirring helicopter. At the open side, a soldier grabbed her by the hand and swung her inside, and then shoved her toward a canvas seat in the back of the aircraft. "Hang on, ma'am," the soldier yelled as the helicopter immediately lifted into the air, dipped its nose, and then soared forward, flying over the huge American base, and then above the chaos of Saigon. Frankie's stomach rebelled at the movement. This did not seem safe. And where were their guns? How could they shoot back at the enemy if necessary? She heard an explosion somewhere, It rattled the helicopter, which swooped sideways. She clamped a hand over her mouth and prayed that she wouldn't vomit. Another explosion, a rattle of gunfire. The helicopter shook hard, clattered like 1,000 bolts in a metal box. Frankie survived the terrifying flight one breath at a time. It was often all she could do not to scream. And then, miraculously, they were descending, lowering toward a helipad. When they touched down, the co-pilot looked back at Frankie. "Ma'am." "What?" Frankie yelled. "You gotta get out." "Oh, right." She couldn't make herself move. The soldier who'd helped her aboard, a medic, yanked her out of her seat and hauled her toward the open door. A female first lieutenant in stained fatigues stood nearby, holding onto her canvas hat, staring up. The medic threw Frankie's bag out of the helicopter. It landed at the first lieutenant's feet. "Ma'am?" he said impatiently. "Jump, Frankie, in heels." She hit the ground hard enough to buckle her knees. She dropped her purse and bent quickly to pick it up. Taking a deep breath, ignoring the pain, she slowly straightened and started to salute. "Lieutenant McGrath, reporting for duty." "Not here," the first lieutenant said. "I like being alive. I'm Patty Perkins, surgical nurse." She held on to Frankie for just a moment, steadying her, and then abruptly let go and started walking. "Welcome to the 36th. We are a 400-bed evac hospital on the coast about 60 miles from Saigon. You are one of 9 female nurses on staff, in addition to male nurses and medics. We keep this place running," the first lieutenant yelled back at her. "It's considered one of the safer posts. The DMZ is up north, so fighting here is minimal. We provide care for the VSI, who are medevaced." Frankie struggled to keep up. "VSI? Very seriously injured. Here you'll see everything from leprosy, to amputations, to rat bites, to what's left of a soldier after a landmine. Most wounds require delayed primary closures, DPCs, which means we clear and debride wounds, but don't close. That will be your biggest job. Most casualties are here 3 days or less. From here, the lucky ones go to the 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon for more specialized treatment. The unlucky ones go back to their units, and the really unlucky ones go home in a box. Keep up, Lieutenant." The woman led the way past a series of Quonset huts. "That's the ER, pre-op, the 2 ORs, post-op, the ICU, and neuro." She kept going. "That's the mess hall. Officers on the right side. Report to Major Goldstein in admin tomorrow at 0800. She's chief nurse." She came to an abrupt halt in front of a row of identical wooden buildings, whose lower halves were protected by stacked sandbags. "This is your hooch. Showers and latrines are over there. Shower quickly. The flyboys like to hover over and watch." Patty smiled, then offered 2 bottles of pills. "Malaria and diarrhea. Take them religiously. Don't drink the water unless it's out of a Lister bag. Or jerry can. If you want, I'll show you." Patty stopped mid-sentence, cocked her head listening. A moment later, Frankie heard the sound of helicopters. "Crap," Patty said. "Incoming. I guess you're on your own, McGrath. Get settled in." With an encouraging smile, she patted Frankie's shoulder and hurried away. Frankie heard the thud of dozens of booted feet, running on the wooden ramps throughout the camp. Frankie felt abandoned. "Buck up, McGrath," she said aloud. Reaching for the door to her hooch, she stepped up the single step and entered a dark, musty, buggy room, about 15 feet by 30 feet. That was divided into 3 separate cubicle-like spaces, each with its own green canvas and metal cot, a makeshift bedside table, and a lamp. Olive green netting hung in swoops over the ugly plywood walls. Above one cot, color photographs were tacked to the wall. A couple, standing in front of a red horse barn, a man with close-cropped hair, leaning against the hood of a Chevrolet truck. That same man standing between a little red-haired girl and a huge black horse. Above the other cot were posters of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali and Martin Luther King, Jr. The third cot, Hers, presumably, had nothing tacked onto the wall, but the plywood was full of tack holes and torn bits of paper from posters that had been put up and ripped down. Her duffel bag was on the floor. There was a small fridge in one corner, and someone had built a bookcase out of old slats and filled the shelves with worn paperbacks. It was stiflingly hot, and there was neither a fan nor a window. A layer of red dirt coated the floor. Closing the door behind her, she sat down on the narrow cot and opened her overnight bag. A brand new Polaroid camera lay on top of the carefully wrapped stack of framed photographs she'd brought from home. She reached for the top one, unwrapped it, held it on her lap. The picture had been taken at Disneyland. In it, Frankie and Finley stood in front of Sleeping Beauty Castle, holding hands. A split second before the camera lens clicked, Finley had grabbed the ticket booklet from Mom and ripped out the e-tickets, saying, "Me and Frankie are going straight to the rocket to the moon and then to the submarine." And Mom had said quietly, "I hope they serve drinks at one of those kiosks, Connor." Frankie felt the sting of tears. There was no one here to see or to care, so she didn't bother dashing them away. She stared at the image of her brother, with his protruding teeth and spit-shined hair and freckled face, and thought, "What have I done?" Next, she unwrapped a picture of her parents, taken at one of their famous 4th of July parties, both of them smiling, a table draped in patriotic bunting behind them. They had been right. She had no business being so far away from home, at war, without Finley. How would she last a year? At that, her stomach roiled again. She ran for the latrines. Chapter 5. Hours later, Frankie was still lying on her cot, trying not to cry or vomit, wishing she'd never joined the army, when the door to the hooch banged open. In walked a pair of women in blood-splattered clothes. A black woman with closely cropped hair who wore shorts, a t-shirt, and combat boots, and a tall olive oil-thin redhead in stained fatigues. Frankie figured they were both older than she was, but not by much. "Look at that, Babs. New blood," Olive Oil said, unbuttoning her olive-green blouse, tossing it aside. There was blood on the woman's bra. She walked forward, clumping her boots, unconcerned about her state of undress. "I'm Ethel Flint from Virginia. ER nurse." She reached for Frankie's hand, shook it aggressively, like cocking a rifle. "This here is Barb Johnson, surgical nurse, from some one-stoplight town in Georgia. She's mean as a dang snake. She made the last girl cry on a regular basis." "That isn't true, Ethel, and you know it," the black woman said, pulling the damp t-shirt away from her chest. "Good God, it's hot." Frankie stared at Barb. Honestly, she didn't know many black people. Something about the way Barb stared back, her eyes narrowed and assessing, made Frankie feel like a kid who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. "I'm Frankie McGrath," she said. Her voice gave out halfway through the introduction, and she had to start over. "Well, Frankie, ditch the uniform," Ethel said, stripping off her bra and putting on a V-necked olive drab t-shirt that revealed the silver beaded chain of dog tags around her neck. "There's a turtle party in your honor." Barb snorted. "Hardly, Ethel. Don't give the kid a false impression." "Well, maybe that's a bit of a stretch. But we have 2 turtles in today and 1 guy going home." "What's a turtle?" Frankie asked. "You are, kid," Ethel said, sounding old and tired and worn out. "Now move your behind. I'm thirsty as hell. It's been a long day, and I surely could use a Coca-Cola." Frankie wasn't used to stripping in front of strangers, but she didn't want her roommates to think she was a prude, so she began to undress. It wasn't until she was down to her undergarments that she realized she had nothing in her duffel or overnight bag to put on except her crisply folded, new green fatigues, which she'd been told to wear for work, or her pajamas, or a pale blue summer dress that her mother had convinced her would be perfect for her days off, or her white nurse uniform. "A girdle," Ethel said with a sigh. She opened a drawer and rifled through it, pulling out a pair of cut-off shorts and an army t-shirt and tossed them to Frankie. "Don't worry, it's not just you. They don't tell us the truth about what to wear over here." "Or anything else," Barb said. Frankie peeled off the girdle and rolled down her cinnamon-hued stockings. She stood there for a second, feeling her roommate's scrutiny, then quickly put on the borrowed clothes. The t-shirt was huge and hung to the top of her thighs, almost covering the cut-off jean shorts. Once Frankie rolled over the waistband to make them fit. Opening her duffel, she found her flak jacket, an army-issued steel pot helmet, and slipped into the sleeveless jacket. Immediately felt its weight. The helmet fell down and covered her eyes. "It's a party," Barb said. "Not a John Wayne movie. Take that shit off." But Frankie turned too fast. The helmet clanked hard onto the bridge of her nose. Hurt. Regulations state. Barb walked out of the hooch. The door banged shut behind her. Ethel gently took Frankie's helmet off, tossed it on the bed. "Look, I know today is a lot. We will help you fit in, I promise. But not now, okay? And as for the flak jacket, just know, okay." Frankie undid the flak jacket and tossed it aside. It landed on the helmet on her cot. She felt exposed and ridiculous in an oversized t-shirt that hid her shorts and showed her bare legs and shiny brand new combat boots that she'd polished obsessively. Why hadn't she packed sneakers? Had the men who wrote the What to Bring section of the information packet even been to Vietnam? She'd had her hair cut in a Twiggy-inspired pixie for her tour, and now, after 38 hours of travel and this hellish humidity, God knew she must look like she was wearing a black swim cap, or like she was 12 years old. Ethel walked fast, talking as she went. "Welcome to the 36, Frank. Can I call you Frank? This is technically a mobile hospital, but we haven't gone anywhere in a while. Instead, we keep getting bigger. We have several doctors and 4 surgeons. You'll know them instantly. They think they're gods. There are 9 of us women nurses, and a couple of male nurses, and lots of medics. In most wards, the hours are 0700 to 1900 hours, 6 days a week. But we are short-staffed right now, so really, we go until the last casualty is taken care of. If it sounds like a lot, it is, but you'll get used to it. Hurry up, you're lagging." In the falling darkness, Frankie couldn't see much of the place. A row of shacks, the hooches, a large wooden building that housed the mess, the nurses' latrines, a chapel, a row of Quonset huts that were weakly illuminated, the hospital insignia painted on their exterior walls. Ethel rounded the corner of a Quonset hut, and suddenly, they were in a wide-open space, a patch of red dirt surrounded by shadowy structures. All of it looked hastily constructed, temporary. Not far away, close enough to hear the whoosh of the tides, lay the South China Sea. Pale light glazed a coil of concertina wire that created a perimeter for the camp. Off to the left was a sandbagged bunker, its entrance a gaping black square beneath a wooden arch, upon which someone had spray-painted Officers' Club on the crossbeam. A curtain of multicolored beads shielded the interior from view. Ethel pushed through the curtains. The beads made a soft clattering sound. The place was bigger inside than it looked. Against the back, there was a plywood bar with stools in front. A bartender stood behind it, busily making drinks. A Vietnamese woman in pajama-like pants and a long tunic top carried a tray from table to table. A stereo system boasted huge speakers. Beside it, there were hundreds of 8-track tapes. Like a rolling stone, blared into the space, so loud people had to shout in conversation. A trio of men threw darts at a dartboard on the wall. Smoke filled the air, stung Frankie's eyes. Men and a few women filled the room, sitting at tables, standing along the walls. One guy was standing on his head with his bare legs crossed. Most were smoking and drinking. When the song ended, there was a beat of silence. In it, Frankie heard snippets of conversation, bits of laughter, someone yelling, "No love lost there, man," Ethel clapped her hands to get attention. "Hey, all, this is Frankie McGrath. She's from..." Ethel turned. "Where are you from?" "California. Sunny California," Ethel said. She pulled Frankie forward, introducing her to the other officers. Patty was near the bar, smoking a cigarette, playing cards with a captain. She smiled and waved. Suddenly the music changed. Out came East Coast Girls Are Hip. People clapped, yelled out, "Welcome, Frankie!" A man pulled her into his arms, started dancing with her. He was tall and lanky, good-looking, in a white t-shirt and worn Levi's. His beach sand blonde hair was regulation short, but the smile on his face and the marijuana cigarette in his mouth told her that he was the kind of guy her father had told her to stay away from. Well, really, that was all men. War bachelors, Frankie, married men who think love's a free-for-all when bombs are falling. Don't you go all that way and shame us. He exhaled the sweet smoke in a rush and offered her the joint. "You want a hit?" Frankie's eyes widened. It wasn't the first time she'd been offered marijuana. She had gone to college, albeit a Catholic one. But this was Vietnam. War, serious times. She hadn't smoked marijuana at the San Diego College for Women, and she sure as heck wouldn't do drugs here. "No, thanks, but I'll take a..." Before she could say Coke, an explosion rocked the O Club. The walls rattled. Dirt rained down from the ceiling. A footlocker crashed to the floor. Someone shouted, "Not now, Charlie. I'm drinking." Another explosion. Red light flashed through the beaded curtain. A red alert siren blared across camp. A voice came out over the loudspeaker. "Attention all personnel. Take cover. Security alert condition red. We are under rocket attack. Repeat, condition red. Take cover." Rocket attack. Another explosion. Closer. The beads swayed and clattered. Frankie wrenched out of whoever he was' arms and headed for the door. He grabbed her, pulled her back. She panicked, screamed, tried to wrench free. He held her close. Someone cranked up the music as dirt rained down on them all. "You're safe, McGrath," the man whispered in her ear. She felt his breath on her neck. "At least as safe as anywhere in the damned country. Just breathe. I've got you." She heard the rockets flare and explode, felt the ground shimmy under her feet. Frankie flinched at every explosion. "Oh God, what have I done?" She thought of Finley. "Regret to inform you. No remains." "I've got you," the man said again as her breathing sped up. He tightened his hold. "Don't worry." The siren sounded again. She felt the man's hold on her ease, felt his tension soften. "That's the all clear," he said. And when another explosion sounded, he laughed and said, "That's us." Giving it back to them. She looked up, embarrassed by her fear. What kind of soldier was she? Standing here, shaking and ready to cry on her first day. But the bunkers, shouldn't we go? What kind of host would I be if I shoved you out of your own party because of a little mortar attack? I'm Jamie Callahan, chess cutter, from Jackson Hole. Just look at me, McGrath. Close out the rest. Frankie tried to focus on her breathing, on his kind, sad blue eyes. Tried to pretend she wasn't terrified. "You're a D doctor," she made herself say. He smiled, and it showed her at last that he was young, or at least not old. Maybe 30. "Yep, Ward 5, surgical." He leaned close. "Maybe you'll work under me." She heard the sexy slur of his voice and smelled the alcohol and marijuana on his breath, and the strange, shifting, exploding world righted for a moment. Became as familiar as a doctor hitting on a nurse. "My dad warned me about guys like you." The explosion stopped. "That's it," Jamie said with a smile. But something about it was wrong, as if maybe he'd been scared too. Someone cranked up the music. "These boots are made for walking." The crowd joined in, sang along, paired up and started dancing. Just like that, the party was back in full swing, with people smoking and drinking and laughing as if they hadn't just been bombed. Jamie smiled. How about a shot of whiskey, California girl? Frankie had trouble finding her voice. I don't know. She'd turned 21 a few months before, but she'd never drunk hard alcohol. He leaned close. It'll stop the trembling. Frankie doubted that. Will it? He gave her a sad look. For tonight it will.